Welcome to the Longest Day podcast. I'm Leah, your host and the founder of Broadstairs Consulting. We help rebuild relationships and facilitate effective dialogue. We are convinced that people matter and that conversations count, so we started The Longest Day, a series of conversations where we learn from the resilience, determination, and candor of our guests. As they look back on their longest days, our hope is that it will empower you to look forward. We hope their stories will be a part of shaping yours. This week's guest on The Longest Day is Ashley Cox. He's the Executive Director of Business Affairs and the General Counsel of Aquatics GB, formerly British Swimming. And he was the interim CEO between May 2022 and May 2023. He worked for British Swimming since 2011 and is currently responsible for Aquatics GB's strategy, as well as driving the organisation forwards, focusing on its strategic aims in performance, major events and international relations. Ash is responsible for overseeing the commercial aspect of the business, such as sponsorship agreements, as well as the regulatory side, including integrity, and the company secretarial function. Ash is a vastly experienced sports administrator, having been involved in sport for over 2 decades. Before joining British Swimming, Ash worked in private practice as a lawyer and was an engineer before that. He played basketball at a national level for a number of years, enjoys all sport, and is passionate about health and fitness. Ash is also a specialist arbitrator for sport resolutions and a member of World Aquatics Athlete Safeguarding Council. Well, Ash, thank you so much for being willing to come on The Longest Day. I think it's fair to say that you are the only lawyer that we have allowed on the podcast thus far. Why don't you tell our listeners about your longest day?
I suppose giving you some context, I think, would be the most helpful start from what I knew was going to be a long day that turned into the longest day. And it starts with an unhappy set of circumstances, really. And my role as not a lawyer, actually, interestingly, at the time, which I'm sure your listeners will be happy to hear, but being the interim CEO from May 22 to 23 in May as well for 12 months for Aquatics GB. And unfortunately, we suffered the passing of our now former chair, Maurice Watkins, who was an extremely well-known sports lawyer and was Manchester United's lawyer for a significant period of time, and certainly while Sir Alex Ferguson was there and dealt with the Eric Cantona affair. So an extremely well-known individual. And then shortly thereafter, unfortunately, our senior independent director retired. And there were a number of other board retirements at the same time, followed by the resignation of our CEO, all within a 6-month period. So if you're thinking about an organization that's relatively thin on resource and then is in a position of flux, that was kind of the scenario that presented itself when I took over the interim CEO role. And that led to the longest day, which actually happened in November 2022. And I'd been away on business in the Middle East, and I'd flown back to the UK on a Wednesday night. And I was scheduled to be in Manchester from the Thursday to the Saturday for an all-encompassing 3 days, which included an aquatics conference, which I'll explain a little bit more about, a board meeting, an AGM, and also an awards. So a very broad mix of corporate and some exciting fun stuff to do as well. And upon arriving, my initial journey was going to be via a lift with a colleague, which unfortunately fell through. Which then meant I was at the hands of the reliable train system on the Thursday morning, which, as you won't be surprised, meant that I was 3 hours late getting into Manchester and had missed first 2 meetings. So at that point in time, I was in a relatively chirpy mood until that point. And then the day kind of carried on as it does for any interim CEO. We have a number of meetings, and the performance director and I met about the aquatics conference, which was happening the next day, and decided that it would be a good idea for me to provide an introductory speech. I'm not particularly averse to doing speeches, but I like to plan. As a lawyer, my trade is like be prepared or prepare to fail, as you could probably imagine. And it was a very important time because we were post Tokyo and setting the scene moving into Paris, which unbelievably is so close for us already. So there were a number of meetings on that night, and to cut a very long story short, it got to about 2:00 in the morning, and I thought, right, I've got to start this speech now because we'd had dinners and I'd met who I needed to meet. So I'm in my hotel room writing the speech, and it got to about 5 o'clock because I like to work it through. I don't like to use notes. I like to memorize what I'm going to say because I think it looks more professional and feels properly engaged to the audience, as it should be, because I am properly engaged and I care about what I do. But unfortunately, at 5 o'clock in the morning, I then got a telephone call from some friends of mine telling me that a really good friend of mine had passed overnight. And I was one of the last people to speak to them. So at this point in time, I think as a person, one of the things that I have the ability to do is compartmentalize pretty quickly and move from one thing to another, which I think is a skill set that a lot of CEOs and a lot of leaders have. So at that point in time, I didn't sleep, as you can imagine. Hence, this is still the same day. So Thursday morning into Friday morning, and proceeded to go about the day's business, which was the Aquatics conference. I managed to deliver the speech, done out to a number of athletes, key stakeholders, UKSI, so about 200 people or so, but a very important meeting to set the scene. We've got a tremendous staff, tremendous group of individuals. And at this point, you very much begin to rely on your senior management team and the board members that are there and present. We've worked together for quite a long time as a senior management team. So I'm very fortunate to have some strong intellectual capacity and also social capital built up over a long period of time, which all stems from trust. And my being able to rely on them was quite critical at this point for obvious reasons. So the day finished and we have a board meeting in the evening. So the board meeting starts at 6 and goes through till about 9, and then you have dinner again. And then all of a sudden it's kind of 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, still the same day. As we flow into what is an AGM and a board meeting in the morning. Now I had some time to prepare for the board meeting, and obviously board meetings are very important, and it's important that it's given my full attention. And so I always prepare the night before any board meeting, even though I've already looked at the papers and I'm aware of what we're discussing. And it was a particularly tricky meeting because during this period of time, of course, we are going through CEO recruitment and chair recruitment at the same time, simultaneously, but not looking to appoint a chair first. And we're very lucky to have found an amazing chair in Karen Webb-Moss, who's Aquatics GB's chair now. And at that time, that was one of the early meetings for her and I, as we then went on to the process of recruiting for a CEO. So that day finished kind of 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now I've got some spare time. I've woken up and I've got off the flight, woken up on Thursday morning. It's now Saturday at 2 o'clock. I haven't had any sleep, but that was the fun time, because we're moving into the awards. But I have to say, there was a point in time there where, I was pretty exhausted. There's a lot going on, and trying to process everything and making sure that the business and the outside world is as it was, which was very calm, very stable. And the challenge was to get up for some fun. But I kind of took a step back and remembered the why. And I think it's always important to remember the why you're doing it. And sometimes you can lose sight of that when you're in the weeds all the time and you're in the detail. And the why is the people. And this is an opportunity to celebrate world-class talent, world-class coaches, world-class staff. And with our commercial partners present, making the right introductions and just having a genuinely positive celebratory experience with the people that we care for and the people that makes us a community and the reason that we do what we do. And the feeling you always have to remember, if you're 0.1% part of an Olympic medal, then you can take that away. And it's very rewarding. And the reason that I think there's a good environment within the organization is because you have to create that environment. And we've got some tremendous people in the organization that do that. But obviously leading that organization, it's very important that I set the tone, which was very important to stay calm, very important to be chameleonic in the way that you talk to different individuals within the business, to provide reassurance for whatever they're dealing with, but also to have some fun. And I think those 3 days or 3.5 days dealing with some personal loss, dealing with a very challenging business environment, wouldn't have happened without good people around me. And I think any good leader would say having good people that feed into the system that you're operating is incredibly critical. And the environment that we've managed to create, which I'm incredibly proud of still, within Aquatics GB now is one of the reasons that I get to wake up every day and enjoy the work that I do and the people that I work with. because we're a performance organization with performance objectives, and we're looking to be innovative every day. We're looking for the edge every day. We're looking to be better every day. And I think that's critically important. So that was my longest day, really, which was 3 days.
Well, as you stood in the midst of the chaos, what in your career to date prepared you with that ability to stand firm, to not react, and to get the job done?
I think there's a number of things. I think it starts for me with my own personal life, which was sport and basketball and football, and being in pressure situations and being familiar with if you agree to engage in the chaos, then nothing good comes of that. If you can stay emotive where you need to be, but broadly unemotive and caring and listen. And when I say listen, it's not just about listening to somebody, it's about hearing what they're saying. And I think having that skill set, plus having been in court on a number of tribunals and turnarounds within 24 hours, where you're having to do the best for your client within that period of time and being committed to doing that because it's their life, it's their livelihood, it's their reputation, whatever the case may be. You're always under pressure. And if you're a general counsel, private practice or in-house, there is always something going on that's challenging you. And I think over those 20 years, together with having an incredible mentor, which I think is vitally important for any business, whether that's at a senior leadership position or whether we're talking about our athletes, having a mentor like Maurice Watkins, who was always calm, always approached matters very sensibly, always was great with communication, was always available, and just having a stoic presence and making the right decisions based on the information that he had at the time. I learned a lot from being in his presence for those 10 to 12 years of how to operate in that scenario. And also with some very talented board members as well that work for incredibly powerful, incredibly big organizations, to be able to have conversations with them as well. But I think for me, if somebody was ever to ask me, what's your superset skill, I think calmness in chaos is what it is. And I wouldn't say it's chaos because to me, it doesn't feel like chaos. From the outside world looking in, it might, with all the change and all the pressures. But really, if you've got a good team and a good structure and good foundations, I think you can genuinely achieve anything that you want to. And we were very fortunate that we continue to do so, in my view.
Well-being. You know the facts. Things are worse than ever. Burnout, trauma, absence, attrition. Leaders are tired of the empty gesturing about mental health. Leaders are resigned to ticking boxes, obliged to throw money away on medically flimsy, temporary solutions that have failed workforces. Adagio VR is the culmination of decades of work by a fellow of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Partners of the NHS and Oxford University, this is the world's first ever virtual reality program using clinical therapeutics accessible anywhere. Take meaningful action. Remove the need to cope. Adagio VR.
How did your role change from being general counsel to being interim CEO?
Tremendously, and in a good way. You embrace it. I think if I'm being completely candid, my first reaction was, this is different. This could be challenging, but I'm all for a challenge. I'm all for being better every day, no matter what you try to do. And I genuinely believe that you accept the challenge and you take it on. And if you've got good people around you, then you can achieve anything you want to achieve. But good leadership is something that I think you learn from other people as well as from who you are. Being inspirational can happen in a number of ways. And I wouldn't say I'm inspirational, but what you'll always get from me is somebody that drops back to their values, and somebody which are, for me, it's trust, it's about integrity, it's about fairness, which will not come as a surprise to anybody who's practiced law for 20 years. But I think having that skill set and then looking at the broader picture made me have to be more strategic and out of the detail, and then look at what a CEO needs to achieve. So looking at the strategic objectives of the business and absolutely focusing on that until the new CEO took post, because we're a performance organization where we're acting on the back of COVID. So COVID meant that there was an elongated period of time where events didn't happen. So in the space of 12 months, or actually in the space of about 6 months, really unusual set of circumstances happened where you'd got a World Championships, a European Championships, and a Commonwealth Games within a 12 to 15 week period. Not only challenging for athletes, but challenging for the coaches, challenging for the management. And being present at those events, I think was always really important. I think when you watch CEOs and you've worked with CEOs in different companies, as an executive, you sometimes hear feedback of what individuals would prefer. And for me, being present, being available, and having a conversation with an athlete if they wanted to, or with a coach if they wanted to, was quite important. But what I realized as CEO quite quickly is that your bandwidth goes from 20% dealing with general counsel work to 80%. And then I was still backfilling some of that general counsel work as well. So it was a case of which hat do I put on at any one time, but managing any conflicts as you imagine we would. But having to be available 24/7, and the travel was a shock to the system, if I'm honest. It was a lot of hotels, but it was for the right reasons and the right objectives. And we focused on international relations and our performance, and we did incredibly well. We still continue on this upward cycle, which is really unusual considering the size of Britain and aquatics. If we take swimming, for example, and the size of Australia and the size of China and the size of America, we continue to punch above our weight. And that's down to the support we get from UK Sport, but some incredible people as well. And my job as CEO is to support them, to reassure them, and to let them know that nothing's changing. That's who we are, and that's what we're about. And let's get it done.
One of the things you mentioned is how much change there was from a board membership, chair changing, obviously incoming CEO. How did you preserve institutional knowledge for incoming and outgoing stakeholders so that you could get that right people first relational culture for the organization to be able to achieve its mission?
One of the things that we're really cognizant of is environment. And that culture question I think is a really important question. And it's something that we strive for. And you get culture by continuity after change. So when the culture's bad, change is required. When the culture's positive, you just keep striving for it to be better. Because you can put a good person in a bad environment and it changes them, and you might see some bad actions from them. Whereas if you put a good person in a good environment, you tend to see them flourish and blossom and become even better at what they do. And that's an interesting one when you talk about terms and when we talk about succession planning and when we talk about board turnover. Because if you look at the American model, which is a personally owned team, there tends to be an owner and a board, which doesn't really change very often. And if you look at the successful teams, whether you pick the NFL and look at, the Kraft family at New England, or whether you maybe expand that through to the Golden State Warriors and whether it's a dynasty or not, I don't want to start a debate, but I'm sure you get comments on whether they are or they aren't. What they do have is a strong ownership model and a consistent ownership model. And it's the same, I think, with San Antonio Spurs. They're another organization that's very, very forward thinking and very broad minded. I think in this country, it's absolutely right for us to have the term rotation, because neurodiversity is really important to what we want to achieve. I think it's down to each business to ensure that you don't lose too much knowledge at the same time, and that you ensure that you keep the sports knowledge within the business as well. So ensuring that you have swimming and aquatic knowledge is very important. But also when you know you're going to lose a board member, independent or otherwise, due to a retirement, that it's staggered in the right way so that you're not losing that knowledge at the same time, which can create a vacuum and a lacuna of kind of knowledge and skills based as well. So what we try to do is look at the skills gaps. We look at the succession plan. We have a people plan, and we try to deliver to that. And I considered my role when the new CEO took on to help them to understand the business historically and why we've got to where we've got to. And I think we could all play a part in that. And certainly the whole SNT engaged with that in really reassuring and providing information as to why certain things happen within a business, when obviously optically you'd think, why does that happen? That's going to happen to any individual that goes into a business. But I think it's about being professional, being open, being transparent, and it's about the culture and the environment that you create. And you're absolutely right. And one of the concerns is that you have some organizations have too much turnover at the same time. So when they are successful, those individuals leave for right reasons and governance reasons, but it does leave a vacuum.
You've mentioned mentorship, and you mentioned the impact that the late chair had on you. Tell me a little bit about the people who have had the greatest impact on your development over the years.
I think there are a number of individuals. I think I'm, again, happy to be personal. My nan was actually somebody that had a great impact on me. I don't think I ever saw her stressed or anxious or angry or frustrated. I think if she ever was, she'd went off and cooked me something. If I ever annoyed her, there would never be a crossword. And she's always a sounding board for me. As a child, as a kid, doing my studies, I always remember sitting there at a table, watching Jerry Springer, and various other things, and us laughing and sort of kind of picking out members of the family who that might be. Very conscious that my family might hear that, and I'll tell them the truth when it matters. But it was always a fun experience, and she encouraged me to study. So spending time with her, watching Murder, She Wrote, while studying for law or for a maths exam or something of that nature, kind of took me out of the how stressful it all was, and it was incredibly important to me. And then from a professional perspective, I think Andy Gray, who gave me my opportunity, who's well known within the sports community, and now retired, but he was a tremendous influence on, and is the reason why I am here and able to have these conversations. And then I think, broadly speaking, on the macro scale, athletes are kind of the people that I've always looked up to, and their behaviors and how they conduct themselves. And, if you look at the people like Kobe Bryant and what a loss to the world he is, not just because of the person that he was, but his just desire to be better every single day, and how he applied himself and cut no corners. It was hard work. It was stressful. It wasn't always pleasant. He wasn't always pleasant. You've only got to look at the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, to see how it have looked. Michael looks back and thinks, well, was I like that? That's who I was. But he just wanted to win. And there's that desire within performance sport to always to want to win, but doing it in the right way is that culture piece and that environmental piece, but also with a tinge of, but it's not everything. It is everything, but it's not everything. And that's a difficult balance to have when you're talking to young people who are striving for Olympic gold, that we also care about their mental wellness and their positioning and their education and who they are as role models. And we've got some incredible leaders in all of our programs, from that mentorship process, which I think is really important. And that's, again, it goes to the board level, to having mentors at that level as well. And for me, mentorship, no, but hero possibly, in looking at the broader spectrum. But I think family is so important as well in providing that grounding to who you are. If I ever step out of place, my older brothers would soon put me back in my place.
I love that. I think that's so important. And I think the same is true of my brother as well. One of the things you mentioned was that you're calm under pressure, and that on your longest day, you were able to compartmentalize. But there's something about the extent of the fusion between personal challenges and professional challenges, and the grief of that experience of loss that eventually catches up with you. How did you process that? And how long did it take before you felt like you had completed that process?
Yeah, it's an incredibly important question to ask yourself, I think. And I certainly ask myself it every day. I'm not even sure I'm possibly over it, if I'm completely honest. I think you don't find time. You don't try to find time because you know it's going to be painful. So you put it off and you keep it in that box. And then the longer it's in the box and then the less you want to deal with it, you find yourself 6 months down the road and you wonder why you're not okay. And you wonder why you're perhaps struggling with your emotions on a particular topic, that something triggers you and you've got no idea why. And it's because you haven't dealt with it. So I think what I learned pretty quickly from friends and family is that you do have to deal with it and you can't just ignore it. Now, the funeral was one thing, and being able to say goodbye and be part of that. Being the last person to speak to somebody is something that I don't think I'll ever properly process. But what I do try to do is never have a conversation that ends badly, without a look, we're still great friends, but we disagree on this. Let's park it. We're not falling out over it. Let's talk again, rather than the angry emotion of hanging up and walking away. But I think from a work perspective, work is a distraction, and there's a danger that you can allow it to be too much of a distraction, that you throw yourself into it completely, which you have to do as an interim CEO in any event. And I was using that as an excuse not to deal with those, not feelings or process those feelings, because it was too hard and I couldn't deal with that as well as the job. So it took a lot of time and some really good friends, including, the director of people, who has this ability to identify when something's not quite right. And we've worked together for a long time. And to be fair, she called me on it and said, "Oi, something's not right. You need to take a step back, talk to me or talk to somebody else, but I can see that something's not right." And I think when that's told to you and you think you're coping, but you're not, quite clearly, I think you have to listen. And I think that's a skill set as well of any senior executive, is being able to listen. It comes back to not just listening, but hearing the message. And I don't think we always do that. I think we move on to the next thing quite quickly. But I would always say my learning from that is never end a conversation on a bad note. And always try to process things as quickly as you can, no matter how hard they are.
That's such helpful and sensitive advice. And I suppose I would tack on to that, have people around you who will tell you hard truths.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the thing. That's a true friend. Is the true friend is that person.
My last question is our signature question, which is, as you were going through this endless stream of days, as the hours passed on your longest day, if you had to live it again, what food would you choose to fuel it?
Do you know what? If it's the last meal question, I'd always, I remember watching The Green Mile as a kid. An incredibly sad but well-made film, and I thought to myself, what would it be? And for me, I'm very traditional, I guess. So it would be the roast dinner. Now, when I say traditional roast dinner, I think if you go to different regions, they're going to give you a different view on traditional roast dinner. So I'm going to go for the Midlands version, or at least the Cox household version, which is, I don't care if people like it, it's going to be Yorkshire pudding, it's going to be some beef, it's going to be some stuffing, it's going to be beef gravy, there's going to be some sweet potatoes, and then probably followed by apple pie. And the people are going to say, "Well, that's not traditional. We do it this way." Fine, but that would be my last meal that would have got me through that difficult longest day, to be honest.
Well, I'm going to invite myself round for Sunday lunch. That sounds great, and I think it's wonderful that you're unashamed about the Cox family Sunday lunch.
You're more than welcome. I'm on a set of players, I can tell you that.
Well, Ash, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing the experiences of your longest day, for the whistle-stop tour of interim CEO, board relations, mental health, dealing with grief and loss, and right-sizing an organisation. It's been so fascinating hearing part of your story. And thank you so much for coming on The Longest Day.
It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to a Broadstairs Consulting Limited podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Tune in soon to hear the next instalment of The Longest Day. Copyright 2024, production copyright Broadstairs Consulting Limited. All rights reserved.